the principal at Tamarkin Camera in downtown Chicago. We have Leica USA here, John Kreidler and Matt Butzauer here on the call, as well as all of you smiling faces. And so in beginning tonight's talk, allow me to introduce Mr. Mark Paola. Mark, thank you for being here.
Oh.
Mark is a fine art and fashion photographer, New York based. And if I went through the litany of clients and projects that Mark has worked and excelled on, we would be here all night and we never talk about Leica. So in our presentation, you will get links to look up Mr. Mark and myself and others as well. So we'll provide, after the Zoom meeting, a number of different links and contact informations. And so if you're interested in connecting with folks here on the call, please contact me and I'll put everybody in touch. After the Zoom meeting, I'll send out an email that has links to everything that we talked about and links to connect to Mr. Mark Paola. So Paola Pictures on Instagram, and you can find Mark at Leica Academies and Leica Conversations worldwide. So it's a little bit of a minor miracle that we got him sitting down in one place here in the United States to speak with us about Leica lenses, both vintage and modern. Again, we welcome your questions. Please put them in the chat. I'll make sure everyone stays connected. So, one of Mark's great strengths is in the photography of models with Leica lenses, and with Leica lenses that make beautiful, beautiful images that have a beautiful bokeh and create unmute. Okay. So, welcome. Once again, Mark, thank you for being here and welcome to Leica Conversations. Oh, hit unmute yourself, brother.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, okay, sorry. I just wanted to mention that there's still a lot of people who have their mics on, and so they're coming up and feeding in and bleeding together. So we want to maybe ask again that everyone unmutes themselves so that we don't get interference. So I don't know if they're, maybe it's all off now. So in any case, it's a pleasure being here. And this is one of my favorite topics, as Dan knows. We go way back, and we always take the deep dive on camera equipment and lenses in particular. So fun to be able to talk about these marvels of optical design and creative tools. Just wanted to say, sort of starting out, that one thing that I wanted people to know is that I have owned or shot fairly extensively almost every lens Leica has made. And so my knowledge base, my experiences base is not on the word of others, but of my own experience. So it makes it sort of fun, and so you don't have to dig around on the internet with people who maybe don't know quite as much. I'm not saying this from ego, it's just I've spent a lot of time in research and testing and experiencing these lenses. So thanks for having me, and let's get started. Where do you want to start, Dan?
Gee, I've got so many questions for you. And,
all right.
Mark's the kind of work that Mark does spans all kinds of different stuff. So again, if I was to say all the stuff that he's done, we'd be here for days. But let's jump in, man. I mean, I got a bunch of questions for you. So the first question I have is, do you have a favorite lens that you love to shoot, and that when you say, I'm just going out for Mark today, I'm going to take some pictures for Mark? What do you
Yeah.
grab? What's your
It,
go-to?
it changes from time to time. And in my, pursuit of my work and my own, presentation of my own soul, it evolves. And right now, it is a cross, but either, and I'm a 50 shooter, but I'm just enamored by two 35 millimeter lenses, which people would think that I've lost my mind hearing this. But basically, the very first Summicron 35 8-element Summicron is one of them. It renders uniquely, that really complements my style. And then the new 35 Apo Summicron, which might be, in some ways, because I don't judge everything by just technical, specs, MTF charts and, how many, line pairs it resolves and this and that. But that 35 Apo Summicron, I think, is the best lens ever made for the format. It's bold as hell,
Wow.
but I believe that. I shoot it every day, basically. And we're going to show you some examples of the use of that lens. And so it's hard because I'll give you an example. Dan. Here's a situation. I was just in Milan and I was asked to shoot an editorial for what's called L'Officiel magazine, showing, doing the editorial on iconic British designer Ozzie Clarke from the 60s. And I shot an M3 and the 50 millimeter reissue of the 1.2 Noctilux. I'm saying this because, well, we got a sharing now.
Yeah, I figured while you're talking
Okay,
about
yeah.
this,
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I just didn't know if I was still on. Okay, so what happens is I use things that are for a purpose, for a certain emotion, for a certain energy. So I use a broad range of lenses because that's what I feel they're made for. And I can still use lenses that were made from, 1930 up to, 2 weeks ago. So I it's hard for me to answer, getting back to the original question of just one, but the 8-element, long time, favorite of mine, and this new Apo. I mean, I love them all, man.
me too.
I really do. This card that's up is interesting because this is new medical science that, how we see, because we're able to track neural impulses much more now than before. And so Louise Gluck, Nobel Prize winner 2020, and she's, quote, we look at the world once in childhood, the rest is memory. Now, this is crazy, everybody. Before we see anything, it goes, images from the information in our eyes, it goes to the memory center first. So everything we see is combined with memory before it even becomes vision. And they say that, 65-75% of the brain's potential is used in the processing of imagery. It's a very complex thing, obviously. But so the idea is that we have to remember that when we're seeing something, whether it doesn't matter what lens it is or what camera, whatever, anything that comes into our visual center goes to memory first, combined with everything that we have seen before that. It's a staggering sort of proposition, but I thought it was important to mention here because we are all unique. DNA, nature, nurture, our experiences combined. So we're not just seeing first. It's not like you just, open your eyes, you see something, and that's what we see. It's like goes through memory first and comes out in the form of vision. So
I love this. I love this slide, and I wanted to. I mean, you chose it, but I wanted to introduce it while you were talking about lenses because I think that it's a very important idea in a discussion of vintage lenses because
of course,
we're because you set out to make an image. I don't mean you, Mark, or I mean anyone. We
anyone.
set out to make an image, and what is the image actually that we see in our mind? Is it something that a different lens can give us? Is it something that's in the framing? What is it exactly? So I like this a lot. I love this quote.
What we see is ourselves. because it's all processed through memory. So everything we see has our own filter on it. So when we say like, oh, this lens is, too sharp, this lens is not sharp enough, it's relative to your own sensibilities,
Yeah.
and another thing that's crazy that people don't know, a lot of people don't know, is that the emotional content of our vision, whether it's a photograph or you go see a movie, the emotional content is contained in the out of focus areas of our vision. Sorry.
Huh.
So, and this is medical science. We can give you links to, we're going to include some books at the end, some neuroscientists and medical doctors on the brain. We're trying to, the marketing system is that they want to sell things that are sharp. Look how sharp this can be.
Right.
It's sharp out into the corners, but our vision is not. That's not where you put your finger in front of your face. Everything is blown out of focus. So we're in some ways going in the wrong directions. But what happens is with Leica, they're aware of this. They are aware of how all the camera companies are aware of how we see. It's just a matter of how do you spend your money and time and what you create as part of your repertoire. Sage, can you find on here in my notes the Thalia quote? I'm going to get a quote here and read it. I'm going off in my Mark Paola way, but these things are really interesting because
I love it because I go off in the Dan Tamarkin way.
and that's why we're here.
I know that's why we're here, and I'm so glad y'all are with us. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen because I want you to see the presentation that Mark prepared, because we'll be able to dive into some of these lenses that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I want, for some of the people who are on the call who may not know the difference between the 8-element Summicron or the Apo Summicron, which I realize you can't see all that well. So let me start this deck and this presentation, and we could talk a little bit about some of the images that we see here and some of Mark's work as well. And let me say also that when Mark talks about neuroscience, he's not quoting a thing. This is part of my shoddy introduction for Mark, is he has an amazing array of skills. Photographer is actually kind of like the most recent one, but neuroscience is something that Mark is very familiar with and trained in. So with that, let me start the deck. I'm going to start the deck on this slide that we went to a moment ago, and then we'll move forward. And so let's see what's next. We look at the world once in childhood. The rest is memory.
Yep.
We're going to talk about, there's lots to talk about. There's lots of Leica lenses, as many of you know. We're going to talk about 35s, we're going to talk about 50s, we're going to talk about 75s, and there's a few other lenses that are in this presentation. The 35 Summicron that we're going to talk about and that we'll see examples of, there's 3 lenses. The 35 Summicron f2 version 1, this is known widely as the 8-element Summicron from the late 50s, early 60s. The currently manufactured 35 Summicron aspherical, and then the 35 Apo Summicron made of unobtainium. That's right now difficult to get your hands on, but it's worth it for any of you that might be interested in this lens. So these are the 3 35 millimeter lenses that we'll talk about in this part of the presentation, and then we'll move on to 50s and 75s. So again, please do feel free to enter into the chat any questions that you have about any of this. Let me, I went too fast. Here we go. So here we have 2 versions, the 8-element Summicron and the 35 currently manufactured Summicron.
Yeah, I mean, the 8-element image was a very deliberate choice. Again, I used lenses and equipment for a particular situation. The image on the left, the 8-element Summicron, I shot in an ancient village near Chengdu, China. And it's important to understand the context, because it's not, for me, this case, I mean, China can be very modern, but this was an ancient village where I wanted to have the feeling of some nostalgia, some, a bygone era. So it gives me that feeling of that time period and what I felt like when I was there, and wanted to be able to share with all of you my feelings at that time, right? And the image on the right is the most modern aspheric Summicron, and that was shot a couple months back, or a few months back, in Milan, Italy, and a fashion thing. And I often shoot very loosely. I don't feel that the world is just sort of stopped. I feel that the world is in motion, is dynamic, as we all know. We all see differently. So I'm just trying to present what I feel. And so that's an example of two very different lenses that were made 60, 70 years apart, but both really valid. And if anyone ever says to you that the 8 element is not sharp, it's old, they don't know what they're talking about. Just call
Yeah,
me.
no, I think you're right, Mark. And it's
Yeah.
great. It's interesting to me, the idea that these two lenses can be paired side to side, because we have lenses, as you say, that are some 70 years apart, but they both render beautifully. One of the people here tonight, Stan, who's a huge fan of your work, is asking a question that actually has to do with the image on the left, the 8-element Summicron.
Yep.
Well, it has to do with all the images, but I think most readily with the image on the left. Do you instill ideas or emotions into your models, or do you kind of let the models do what they feel? Like, how much of
Great.
what you're going for do you instill in your model before you begin shooting?
Zero. With the exception of my choice of who I work with, because
Right.
I tend to choose the people, whether it's for stills or cinema, I'm a film director as well, that are the character. I want to have them be themselves. I don't tell them what to do or what to feel or think about your boyfriend or a friend. All I do is I choose the right person and pretty much just let them be. In this case, this gal from Dali, China, her name is Yo, spelled Y-O-U, like you, but her name is Yo. We had no language common at all, and we would just sort of, I'd say, oh, just stand there, and she'd assume that where I wanted her to be, and I let her be. And that's the way
Yeah.
that I get something unique. I don't want to tell her, like, put your left foot forward and your left arm, and I want to have this shape.
Right.
Nah, none of that stuff. So I just tend to, I work with people over and over again, and I choose people by who they are and what they'll give me naturally. And that's sort of my objective. I hope that
I love it.
answers.
I mean, that's actually kind of it's a huge question that Stan asked, and I think that um, it's gonna come up again. I think, because I
Yeah,
have some questions about
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
models and about your process.
yeah.
And while we're on 35 millimeter lenses, and I'm gonna advance to the next slide just so that we can see more 35 millimeter images while I ask Brad's question of, have you used the 35 double aspherical lens, the super collectible, very very first version of the 35 Summilux?
Yes. Extensively, know it really well. And you've got a situation where there's a parallel between the original Noctilux of 1966,
Yes.
hand ground aspherical elements, which, if you don't know what that is, it's quite a feat. It's also the case with the 35 Summilux aspherical, two hand ground aspherical elements, which there was only one person at Leica who could grind these
Yeah.
elements. I've forgotten his name offhand, but this is a tremendously difficult task in both cases, and it can be argued, and it's hard to prove, but in both cases, they were given up making them because their failure rate was so high, nearly impossible to make. But in short, without getting too technical, like Dan just and I go off like into the ether of technical stuff, but what happens is you're controlling light coming through several elements, atmosphere, coatings, lens, like you're controlling the rays of light, where they focus. Apochromats focus at one point, all three wavelengths of colored light. Aspherical, you're controlling dispersion, and what's the other word? Refraction. So
Refraction. Yeah.
Refraction and dispersion are the two sort of simplest, if you will, elements. So instead of it being like a constant curvature, there are aspherics involved. So the third, now that's the technical side. Both of those lenses are extensive experience. Here's the original Noctilux. I don't know if you can see that. Well, it's in the bubble, but so, and Dan has one sitting there. That's the original 1.2 that is not unlike the lens you're questioning. And they render in a way that it's very skilled and yet has a human softness to it. Not that it's not sharp, it's the gradual, how the contrast is controlled. People confuse, and deliberately so for the manufacturers, that there's a difference. Contrast is one of the main determining factors of sharpness, and they work hand in hand. So when you say something has a softness to it, there's a gradual gradation of sharpness that gives it a human, alive feeling. So if you can and are so inclined to find a good example of the 35 double aspherical, or where it's spelled out aspherical, not ASPH, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. Do you think that of the 35s that we're talking about, that is the 8 element, the double spherical, and the 35 Apo Summicron, what are the salient differences between the three, do you think?
Well, they're all three very different, and the like I said, the Apo 35 Summicron I think is the best lens made for the 35 millimeter format by any manufacturer. I'm not talking about military stuff because that's another world, but that thing, I'm daily, my mind is blown with that, the new Apo lens. It took me like a year to get one, and normally
likewise, our clientele are feeling that pain as well, and that it's a very difficult lens to obtain these days. The reason that I have one here is not because I want to show that I have something everybody doesn't, but so that when you come to visit Chicago, Mark, Ronald, Andy, Barbara, anybody, you can take this lens out so that you can actually get a chance to use it firsthand. We have some questions about 50 millimeter lenses, but I want to wait until we get there. Let's look at the next slide, because we have two 35 Apo Summicron images here, and I think they're terrific, because in the one on the left, you can see this beautiful fall off and the just insane sharpness of the lens. And when we talk about vintage lenses, it's important to note that there is a difference between contrast and sharpness. So a vintage lens that's 75 years old can still be sharp. They're just not so contrasty. And so it's striking a balance between these two aspects of lenses. And I think that the photograph on the right definitely shows the sharpness, but I don't know that it really shows exactly what the Apo Summicron can do, because everything is right there and it's that sharpness. But in the image on the left, we can see the beautiful fall off at f2 and the amazing sharpness. What do you think, Mark, V is asking about what do you think about the new steel rim reissue lens? This is a new 35 Summilux f1.4 that's affectionately known by collectors as the steel rim lens. Have you
Yeah.
used that one much, and how does it
Yeah,
figure into the other
not a
35?
lot, not a lot, because I've been traveling so much, so I've had a hard time spending some time with that lens. But of course, I know the lens well. The Dr. Mandler designed lens, and beautiful flare characteristics, and the reissue retains those elements. There's a reason why they're bringing them back, because they're valid. But let me just
Yeah,
stop for 1 second. So these two lenses are very used in different conditions, but the important element is you can make someone look really bad with a lens with poor lighting and super sharpness. What I say is I do testing a lot. That's my livelihood. That's how I eat, is to be able to render things like this with this unbelievable sharpness, and at the same time, the flattering nature of it. I'm not
right.
seeing deep in pores, or like, where you can destroy someone's face if you don't use it properly, but then you can make it. I call it wringing its neck. I take these lenses and I just make it mine. And these are two examples of that, where that lens like is brutal. It can be, or not. You have to
Yeah.
make a lens yours by what you want to do. What's the destination? What do you want people to feel under what conditions? But so we can go on. But
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually, it goes to Ron's question about why you choose the lens that you choose and what, the strengths of each lens. For example, we talked a little bit about the fall off. We talked about how incredibly sharp and contrasty the new 35 Apo Summicron is. Do you go into a shoot saying, or into a project saying, I want to use this lens? Or do you maybe switch lenses around in the middle of a shoot because you're getting something different than what you wanted? How do you
no,
choose?
there's no such thing as that in my work, Dan. Like, I have to know
Yeah.
everything. There's no oops, let me try this. When I go to work, I don't want to sound cocky or whatever, but I have to know what I'm doing, so there
Yeah.
is no confusion like that. So that's why I do a tremendous amount of testing, and have sort of accumulated a sort of vast knowledge of these things, so I can use the right equipment for the right setting.
The right
So
tool for the task.
yeah,
Mark,
no,
what kind of camera are you using for some of the, I know that these photographs were made over over a period of time, so it might
no,
not be the
certainly.
same photograph, but can we take just a moment to talk about the camera that you use with these lenses before we move on to 50 millimeter?
Yeah, two primarily. It's called an M246. This is a special version of it. I don't know if you can see that, but this is called a Yormark. It's a limited edition camera. It has the second version of the Summicron aspheric. This is all black paint. They're not normally, but this is a monochrome camera. So it's the M240 monochrome, which is called the M246. It's a brilliant black and white rendering that is very consistent with my sensibilities. So this is what I call my daily. This is on my shoulder every
Yeah.
day. And then I shoot with the SL2S, which is just staggering. And I get questions every day. Well, what are the difference between the SL and the the SL2 and the SL2S? That's a whole nother show that we can do.
That it's a whole other episode.
Yeah, but so SL2S and the M246 are my two go-to cameras. I like
And
the
so
low.
are the color photographs that we're seeing here made with the SL camera or with an
Yeah,
M camera, do you think?
this one, yes. Yeah, the one on the left
So,
here that's the SL2S.
so this is an SL model camera with one of Leica's larger lenses on it, and you can see that it's not gigantic, fits in the hand pretty well. So this is what Mark is talking about. Um, you shoot wide open a lot, don't you?
Not a lot, but always.
I love it.
I'm not
Oh,
kidding.
there you go.
I'm
There's an
not kidding.
answer. There's an answer to V's to V's question. Tim is
Period.
asking. Tim is asking about like how would you compare the pre-aspheric 35 Summicrons to the 35 Summicrons that we're shooting today, whether they are the new 35 Apo or say version 4 like the Boca King or some of these earlier pre-aspheric lenses.
Respectfully,
You have
I
a
don't know, Dan, who made up this Boca King thing. That's a newer something,
yeah,
nomenclature. I don't know where it came from because it was never called that before. It's a great lens. Like I said, the 8-element, 35 millimeter, the Summilux double aspherical, and this new Apo, to me, are the three best 35 millimeters ever made. All of them are great. It's just a matter of
yeah,
what your purpose is. Like
yeah.
the new Apo was like driving a Formula One car. It's an amazing car, but you better know what you're doing. You're going to get in trouble.
That's
Spend.
right. If you're up against a driver who knows how to drive better and has an old Subaru, you could get whooped.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
interesting because it goes to Chuck's question about like do you change lenses based on whether you're shooting digital or film or really the lens is the driver.
totally. Everything that comes on into that camera comes through the lens, unless you open up the
Yeah.
back to film in it. But yeah, so everything is premeditated. It's an interesting thing. I've not had a lot of discussion about it, but I'm having a great time with the very advanced designs, these Peter Carber designs and film. People
Yeah.
are not, they're using the advanced designs for the advanced sensors, but go the other way, like the 75 Noctilux,
Yeah.
and put it on an M3. It'll blow your mind. It's such an amazing thing because you got this richness of the organic grain, but this extraordinary sharpness that was not available at the time when that you were shooting film. And so
When
now
everybody was shooting Tri-X. Right, right.
shoot, mega resolution lens on Tri-X, and you get this other thing that's just amazing. I
Do
really
you
urge everybody to
feel
try it.
do you ever feel constrained by 24 megapixels? Like does the megapixel count figure in to this equation and how?
Well, this is a very hotly contested thing. For me, unequivocally, for me, 24 megapixels is magic. And the reason why, without getting into too much, technical stuff, 24 megapixels has a certain pixel pitch and pixel density, the
Hmm,
size of the pixels and their distance from each other.
hmm,
24 megapixels is magic for me. Now, Leica may not like that because they're making cameras that are, but the SL2S, by the way, has 24 megapixels and it's their current camera. Why did they do that? And I'll tell you why, because it's considering pixel pitch and pixel density, and that's magic. There are other manufacturers that are manufacturing currently with 24 megapixels, and a lot of people like a lot of megapixels and sharpness, and it's a different thing, and it's totally valid. I like 24 megapixels. Both of my cameras, going to the previous question, are 24 megapixels. And it's, it's, I don't say trust me. That 24 is the right thing.
yeah. Yeah, I find the same thing myself. I wanna continue moving along the deck because you have other terrific photographs in 35 millimeters. So I think that the photograph, both of these photographs showcase what a Leica lens can do under somewhat adverse conditions.
Yep,
The image on the left, disparate lighting,
yep,
obviously it's a well exposed photograph, it's a beautiful photograph. The image on the right, very difficult situation.
yep.
Um, and so I'm gonna guess that they're both at f2.
Yep.
And how do you figure out the how do you figure your framing? Like,
That's funny.
what do you do to frame? Because both of these images have they have, if you'll forgive my saying it, they have a B-roll look to them.
Yep.
And what I mean is, the image on the left, things are not quite straight. Now, I was trained in the theater where there are no straight lines, so I can dig it.
Yeah.
The image on the right looks like it was maybe out, just kind of out of the pocket, like boom, oh, there's a picture, boom. And so I'm curious, how do you go about framing with each of these lenses?
Yeah. Well, here's the situation. While your viewers here, our viewers, were thinking, maybe this guy's crazy. This will make them certain that I'm crazy. Both of these images were shot without looking through the camera, without focusing. So I have a good idea because I've been shooting these cameras for a long time,
Right.
but I was not looking through the camera for either of those. So it's ironic and interesting that you chose those and to speak about this. But yeah, I believe in the world is, I mean, it's rotating at 1,000 miles an hour and like stuff's moving. Thank God for gravity. But so I want a feeling of alive. And
Yeah.
people, my clients are all like, Mark, how could you make things look so natural? And it's like, well, wait till you see how I shoot. Like literally, neither of those did I look through the camera. And I often do this, where I'll maybe do a few at the beginning, get some framing, focus, shoot a few, and then I just take it away from my eye. The model thinks I'm nuts, but she's very relaxed because obviously I'm not being too, particular about it. And these are the results.
I'm glad that I asked that question, because I don't want to suggest that you're giving us B-roll stuff. They're terrific pictures. It just occurred to me that you might be doing this kind of shooting, and I think that my guess is that you know your focal length, you know your distance, and you know your frame. And that's what allows you to take the camera away from your eye and be able to, have a thing where like, oh yeah, that's great. Oh yeah, keep going. Oh, perfect,
You
perfect,
got it.
perfect. Oh, that's great. That's great. Because you know what you're doing and you don't have to hide behind the camera. And there's nothing wrong with hiding behind the camera. I'm a left-eyed shooter. And so I very frequently am completely obscured by my camera. But I think that there's a lot of people here tonight that would be interested to know not just what lenses you're using and what camera you're using, but how you're framing these images.
Exactly.
And so I wanted to touch on that a little bit. I want to look at more of your images, and we got to move into 50 millimeter, because while you and I could talk all night, we've got a limited amount of time. So I want to ask a very sensitive question to Mark. And this is a sensitive question because I had one of these lenses, and I sold it before I let Mark have a chance to shoot with the 50 millimeter Elcan f2.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel guilty about it. But who is it's asking? I think somebody was recently asking about the Elcan lens. What do you think about that f2 Elcan?
Well, it's fortunately I was able to, I have been on a few occasions able to shoot that lens on the KE7A camera, and which is like an M4 but a military version.
Right.
This is interesting because that camera lens was made, I think, 73 or 74 for the US military, and that lens, I might be fooled at times under certain conditions between the new Apo Summicron and the 50 Elcan from the 70s.
Yes.
And it's so unbelievable and unique the way it draws the images. The technology has been around. I mean, this lens is near impossible to make the new Apo, so that's why there's so few of them in the marketplace. They'll come around, so you just got to be patient. But
that's right.
Also in the 70s, from space, from an orbiting vehicle, there's a camera and a lens that could resolve the date on a quarter from space, a quarter lying on the ground on Earth. So we've got to understand like the difference between some applications and that.
Right.
That LCAN and several LCAN made for the military and surveillance and stuff like that. Just amazing technology. You can't employ all of it because people couldn't afford it, and you can't make it. It takes too long, and that was part of how Canada were able to be in business and doing such stellar work for so long, is because they were also making pieces for the military.
Military. That's right. Military applications.
Yeah.
So we're in the world of 50 millimeters.
Yeah.
So let's talk 50s. Tell me about the images that we have here.
Yeah, here we've got the 095 50 Noctilux on the left, and the F1 Noctilux that was designed in the released in the mid-70s. And so you can see that there is an absolute sharpness in both of them, but a more gradual fall off on the 50 millimeter F1, which they learned from the employment of aspherics on the F1 and employed non-aspheric because it was too hard to build them with aspheric, because there was only one guy who could ground the damn things. So this is between 75. I have my example, I think, one of the first 300 of the F1 Noctilux. And then when this was actually the cinema version of the 09550 on the left. So it's hard to see because we're looking at a computer monitor, and but there are differences, and when blown up larger, and you can see there's different coloring. They were taken at the same time. There's different coatings, so you give it a different feeling. Coatings are more important than you can imagine.
Yes.
How
yes.
these are rendered. So it's not just lenses, it's the coatings. Every single F1 Noctilux, every 50 millimeter F1 Noctilux, every single one, this is debated, it doesn't need to be, every single one was made in Canada, period. There are no German versions.
That's right.
They the glass they used for that lens was highly illegal in the United States, in Germany, to make. So just a little aside of the challenges of making and designing lenses. So you've got, what is that? So that's a version 3 or 4.
So this is the currently manufactured 50 f.95, and the only Noctilux that I have here is the latest version of the F1. So it's not identical to the one you're using, Mark, but it's similar, and it's an F1 version. They're both just, spectacular pieces of optics. And Leica made a lot of changes along the way in the Noctiluxes, and the versions of the Noctiluxes can be a little bit bewildering. But one, I'd like to point out to everybody here in our meeting tonight, that if you look at this picture of Sage, and this is Mark's assistant, Sage.
No, my producer, she runs the whole show.
She runs the whole show. She's fabulous.
I'm the assistant.
That's right. It's debatable who's the talent, right? Exactly. So anyway, Sage is wonderful. I know she runs the show. But let's look at this photograph just together for a moment. Look at the ends of her hair.
Yeah. And
in the corner of the eye, you can see a little bit. So there is a difference in the rendering of these lenses. And Ron asks, is there an alternative lens to an F1 or a 0.95 Noctilux? Like, Mark, let me ask you this. If you had to go back in time or back into the world of waiting tables and eating ramen, if you couldn't get a Noctilux, what lens would you shoot? Ooh. To get that same fall off, the bokeh and the beautifulness of the Noctilux.
Yeah, you can't, exactly, but start with Dr. Mandler.
Yeah.
Because he designed, for instance, the E58, the Noctilux F1. He designed I might go to the 50 millimeter Summicron, Summilux version 2, not the silver one, but the second version. I'd
Yeah.
probably go there and just tape it on F1.4 and have fun.
And just let her rip. Yeah. What
Yeah.
now? Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite Noctilux version?
Well, yeah, the E58, the first version.
The very first one. Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of, they command more money now. I don't care about that, but not that I don't care about money, but I won't sell my lens or
Yeah.
ever. The E58 it commands a little bit more money, and the reason is because it is unique, even in the series. It's got a 58 millimeter filter thread, which you may think, well, who cares? But the interesting thing is, it's a 58, opening aperture, open, front aperture hole, entrance pupil, and
Right.
instead of a 60 of the version that Dan now holds in his hand. So you can, when you're designing optics and designing a lens, having 2 more millimeters makes a big difference in the design of the lens. And so people overlook that. They don't, but but the early one has more vignetting, which I love. So the
Yes.
E58 vignettes 3.5 stops into the corners, and they tried to control that a little bit with the subsequent versions, which they did ever so slightly, but the first one just has that magic of a little bit more vignetting. It just sort of, it's almost like a hug.
Yeah. I
Makes
love
you
that.
feel good,
Tell me about the images that we're looking at now. What's what, and why did you shoot with each lens?
Yeah, I'm on the left is the 095, and you can see it. There's a resolution and a contrast characteristic, combination that is clearly the 095, and I'm shooting that mostly when I'm shooting the 15 Noctilux. I'm not currently shooting the E58. I have that sort of, it's in a vault someplace where it's just chilling for a while. I'm shooting the 095 because I have to shoot it on the cinema side, the motion side also, and I don't want to just carry around so many lenses. But interesting. Well, I'm not going to go into that story, but and on the right side on your screen is a fashion, shot backstage, and what it does is, again, talking about like the rendering of the F1, it brings you in and hugs you. This one tells a story of being there, so that it's more naturalistic, like the way we see, and so is more compelling than maybe either stopping down or using a different design lens. So they both have their place. The one on the left was shot, I don't know, a couple of months ago. I have such a bad sense of time. And then the one on the right was shot maybe 6 or 8 years ago. But that, like I said, that lens is sort of semi-retired at this point. But
It's a fabulous lens. I mean, if you look at the detail of the photograph, even on our little screens
yeah,
here on the Zoom meeting, I mean, you could see the strands of hair, or I don't even know what. It's amazing, the
yeah,
detail.
yeah.
Do
You see
you?
sharpness, and that's, again, wide open,
Yeah.
invariably. Yeah.
And do
Oh,
you
oh,
get is
Faith just mentioned something. Sorry, Dan. The one on the right, I had a show, a solo show for Leica in Dali, China, part of the biggest international photography exhibition. What year was that? I can't remember, but as we were walking up to the venue in Dali, China, we came around a corner, and this was blown up 3 stories tall. I was stunned, shocked, stopped in my tracks, like literally 3 stories. And it was so incredible because it left nothing. I mean, it had no problem. The proper viewing distance and stuff, like, it was just amazing. Again, that was the M240, which is a 24 megapixel
It just
camera.
goes to show you what 24 megapixels can do.
Yeah. So when you
And do
talk
you,
about a billboard, I've
yeah,
seen it. So it's not all megapixel. I mean, there's each his own, right? But
of
for me,
course.
24 is magic.
So do you get in when you're shooting, do you try to get in as close as you can, or do you is that part of what you do at the wide aperture, is get as close as you can?
Yep. Yeah, and surprisingly, I know 3 feet. The minimum focusing on a lot of these lenses.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even have to look through the camera. I don't even have to focus. And I do it all the time. I joke, when I'm teaching a master class or something, and I'll just go like this, and I'll take the picture, and then we look at it and they go, "Oh my God, it's sharp. How did you do that?" Well, it's like, it's knowing your tools,
Yeah,
Not,
that's right.
but quite frankly, I don't care if things are sharp all the time. That's not life for me.
That's
You
right.
know,
Sharpness is a bourgeois concept.
yeah. I mean, I've got out of frame over here an 8x10 Cinar. If I want sharp, I got that. But yeah, so it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
We have
See,
more examples here of the 50 millimeter.
same thing. Yeah. Yeah, you got this, resolution and what they call micro contrast in the image on the left. But again, it has a fall off. I'm shooting wide open. I know that I'm not going to retain a harshness through most of that image because I don't want that. But often I'll get the eyelashes in and like let everything else go just subtly
Yeah.
out.
How
Um,
much post production do you do? Have you I've heard it said that you may typically print JPEGs out of the camera,
yeah,
or
I don't. Yeah, I mean, yes, we do. Because I have to deliver basically at the end of the day these days. You
uh,
shoot, and then by dinner time, that media is out. Um, I don't, a lot of it's used for web stuff. If I'm going to print and I go, just make it into a TIFF, and then, it's profiled for printing. But I do zero post-production, zero, no cropping, no manipulation of color, this and that. I know what the color is of the camera. I know the color in the room. I'll often read color temperature with a meter even. Do not do anything automatic in the camera. No ISO, no Kelvin, no auto color balance, white balance.
everything dialed in?
Everything. I start with what's optimum. While the camera will make a great image, let's say, with its auto capabilities, very advanced these days, but it's still not what I'm seeing. How can it know what I'm seeing?
Right.
So I'll look at the environment. I carry a color, a color meter. I'll just pop it up just to see what it is exactly, and I'll sort of go from there. Oh, I want a little warmer. I want a little cooler, type of thing. So it's my picture.
Yeah, knowing the light, knowing your gear, knowing the light, and being able to gauge it. Now this question from Pierre, I got to read this verbatim because I have this same question for you. You've already answered the question of whether or not crop is a four-letter word. At least you don't crop, but in other words, that's not part of your process.
Right, right.
But this question I've got to read verbatim. Do you dare use a clear filter on your lenses?
That's fine. Is it a Pierre? Ask him if the Pierre who I know.
I just had to read it because I don't know this person. So like,
No, I
but
don't know.
I just love the question.
I want to know if it's Pierre, the Pierre who I
I'm
know.
sure it is. I'm sure it is.
Oh,
That's why I had to ask it verbatim. So I come from the school where I would rather scratch a filter than this beautiful optic.
Yeah.
So I personally use filters. How do you feel about them?
It's a double-edged sword, I guess they say. Yes, I use filters. Couple reasons. One, I came from the era where you had to use color control filters to make things color accurate.
Right.
That's one thing. We would go test an emulsion batch of film and then shoot a catalog, and it all had to be correct and this and that. So I come, old school analog stuff. But I too, it's like I have such a reverence that came from my father, who was a very accomplished and fine photographer. Just the way he would hold a lens, with such respect and reverence. And I have never, been inclined or been wealthy enough to just not care, which I think is totally fine. A lot of pros, they go through gear and they're clanking around and stuff. I can't do that. So yes, I use a filter and to protect lenses. And yes, I'm aware of really aware of what that effect is, because again, any glass surface or glass air surface, it has characteristics that influence the look of the lens, just like it's a lens element itself.
And have you found that there's any appreciable difference from using a clear filter? And I'm talking about primarily, the question is primarily about protective UVs, not so much.
Yeah. It's the filter technology is so good. You think about like the coatings that are now developed. It's built in to my workflow and my image flow is having the filter on there.
Yeah.
Does it have a slight effect? If you talk to Dr. Mandler, who's now deceased, so that'd be a little hard, or like Peter Carver or anybody who's like deep in this, sort of optical design stuff, yes, it will have an effect. It's another two surfaces. But they make them really well, like, B+W, of course, Leica, there's some great, filters out there. But technically it does have an effect, but it's an effect that I used in order to be able to sleep at night. So without,
Right. Me too. I wouldn't want to replace my front element on any lens.
Yeah.
We have a couple of other questions that I want to address real quickly
Yeah.
before we move on to 75, because I think 75 millimeters is what's next. But Chris asks about 8 elements made in Canada. No, Chris, they were made in Canada and in Wetzlar.
Right.
What Mark was saying about it was about Noctilux, the 50 millimeter f1 Noctilux, and they were all made in Canada. So I think that maybe that is what you're asking about. Do you use ND filters?
Oh yeah.
When you're shooting? Yeah, because you want to shoot wide open.
Have to.
You have to.
Yeah. Yeah, film stuff, obviously, because you don't have shutter speeds like a 16,000th of a second, like on the cameras, so you're limited to 1,000th or like a 2,000th on the old SLs, the old film SLs. So yeah, because I want to keep it at f1. So the ND9, the 3-stop, 8-time, that pretty much gets you through the day at 1,000th of a second at f1. On Tri-X rated at 200. So
see, it's exactly that kind of thing, that calculation that gets built into our brains. And for Mark, it's built into his brain because he shot a lot of film, and you don't have to shoot film to have that calculation built into your brain. It works the same for digital.
Exactly.
It works the same for digital. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't know our gear well enough to say, okay, I want to be at f1.2, so that means, gee, there's no way I'm getting above this, so time for a filter.
Yep.
And so knowing your gear so well is what enables Mark to get shots like this in the moment. Even though we're not talking about the decisive moment, we're talking about, it's still a moment. These people that Mark is making these portraits of, they're alive, they're moving.
Yeah.
And it is still a moment. And so we're going to leave the notion of Henri Cartier-Bresson, the decisive moment, out and just say, look, it's still a moment. And we want to make sure that we get it. And I'd like to go back to, will this let me go back? Let me go back to this shot on the right.
Yeah.
It's a great moment. Very difficult exposure to make, but you
Yep.
know your gear, you know your focal length.
Yep.
So we talked about the original Noctilux, the new Noctilux, the f1, and the 0.95. And I encourage any of you who have further questions in more detail about any of these lenses or other lenses to reach out to myself or Mark, and I'll put us all in touch at the end of this Zoom meeting, so that we can talk further about these either directly or together again. Mark, these are just beautiful pictures. I mean, just absolutely beautiful. I'm just thrilled to be seeing them.
Thank you.
I hope I haven't missed anybody's questions, but keep them coming, kiddies. So here's two more.
Yeah.
I love this picture on the left.
Yep.
It's fabulous. I mean, look at that follow off.
Yeah, that was taken in Porto, Portugal, where they make great port wine and also Leica cameras. There is a Portugal factory outside the city limits of Porto. It's just a wonderful city, but that's at the train station in Porto, Portugal. And yeah, again, it's just, you know, I want to create an environment where you capture a feeling, and this is just what the mood was. I didn't tell her anything to do, except for where to stand.
Yeah.
You know, the lenses are designed in such a way that they have a certain, dynamic range, you know, coupled with the sensor, with whatever the dynamic range is of film. And you know it, you see it, you just, dial it in, make it happen.
Yeah, yeah. I love the picture on the right. It's fantastic. It's unlike a lot of fashion photography or model photography because she's not looking at the camera. She doesn't even really have welcoming. It's like it's just a moment.
Yep.
You know, it's not like she's not mugging it up or posing or anything, but it's a beautiful, beautiful photograph. And I love it that all of the lines and everything that's happening in the out of focus area is still so well defined. And just it's a beautiful photograph. And
I really
what did you
appreciate it.
take this one with, Mark? I can't
That's
see.
the E58 Noctilux, the F1. Yeah, you can tell. I mean, if you start like looking at them in rapid succession, it's like, oh, that's E58.
Yeah.
Why it's so sought
So
out there. And I might say, I mean, probably everybody or most of you know Dan already, but what's interesting is that he has such a reverence for and a knowledge of all these Leica lens considerations, but he has stuff like, I can't wait to get there. Like when I've been in his shop, he's got so much cool stuff that it's a great place to, like he said, come try something. He just lets you walk out the door with it and take some pictures.
totally.
Yeah, and that's that's what I encourage is experimenting, try it. It's hard to get to everything. There's a few stores around the world that do this, and it's an amazing thing to build the confidence with the owner of these places so that you can test these things and formulate your own opinions on it. But yeah, thank you so much. I have a real hard time, Sage. Every day, all day, people give me compliments and I don't even hear them. And I'm really trying. I want to thank you for saying the nice things, the kind things you're saying, because I have a hard time hearing them. So I therefore don't respond. Like she'll say, did you just hear what that person said? And I'm like, no. Mark,
Well, it's funny. You and we're kind of cut from the same cloth because I'm the same way. I just keep charging ahead, and it's not because I don't have an appreciation for what anybody has said, but I'm always trying to push things forward.
No,
So thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
And it's my pleasure to talk about your pictures. It's really fabulous. I mean, we do have a few more questions that I want to
yeah.
I want to get to, but let's move into wait, what's the next slide? Are we ready to move into no, more 50s?
Okay. Now, this is a great example. This was the shoot I did for L'Officiel magazine in Milan for Ozzie Clark Designs, shooting in M3 and the 1.2 Noctilux, the reissue.
Yeah.
So the 70s look. So this is Tri-X, huh? Sorry, 60s look. not 70s. So this is what would be authentic to that time. A double stroke M3, you know, Tri-X in your pocket, you know, and a beautiful lens and a beautiful setting. You know, we flew the model from LA to Milan because she's so 60s.
Yeah.
You know, has such a great look and spirit. And so that's an example of how you choose and use equipment for a particular look. When the magazine saw these pictures after we got them out of the lab, they freaked out. Like, what did you do here? Like, you know, and it was, I took some pictures with some film, you know.
Yeah.
They loved it. And, you know, we had it, you know, processed, what's called bottle run at this great lab in Milan, and they processed it overnight, and, you know, just like the old days. And
Yeah.
so it has an organic, authentic sort of rendering, you know, so choose what is best for what you're trying to say. I mentioned earlier, we don't talk about it a lot with the Leica stuff, but I'm a director and a longtime director. And so when I do like some master classes, I'll ask everybody in the class, okay, what's your movie? What's the inciting incident? What are the challenges? Who's in it? Where were they born? What are they wearing? You know, what are their personal sort of difficulties? How does it resolve? If you think about all these things just for a photograph, then you can start to think of like, okay, there's a destination. Like, yeah, what time period was the person in when, you know, answer all these questions so that you can best utilize yourself, right? Your own DNA, your own nature, nurture, and then applying it to photography or film, you know, motion film, you create an image that resonates something, you know. So this is a great, maybe we can come back in a few months and do it, and then we can show you the magazine so you see like, you know, what the difference is, you know. But so
yeah, we'd love to do a follow-up. These are two of my favorite photographs in this presentation, in
yeah,
part because they have that old look. It reminds me very much of Catherine Deneuve and some of these. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. It's just absolutely fabulous. Now I got to ask you, Mark, because we have a question. We have a question, but I want to. You mentioned a little bit about getting a lens and putting it into use. Do you have a way that you test lenses? Like when you get a new lens, you're like, wow, I love that lens. And now how do I make it work for me? Do you have a system of testing lenses
yeah.
that you use?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's just use one word: extensively. When I test them, I actually test them. I don't just, you know, right. Yeah. Sage is like, but what do you do? Yeah. So like earlier, you saw the side by side of the Noctilux, so the beautiful pictures of Sage. You know, so fortunately, I have her around to do a lot of the testing, but I'll test a lens, you know, on film camera, on a digital camera, you know, interior, exterior, hard light, soft light, backlight, side light, outside. You know, I'll test it at different focal lengths, at different focal distances, because lenses are not necessarily optimized for all of the, like a
That's
lens.
exactly right.
And so they give you a feeling at minimum and this different that and at infinity. So I'll know a comprehensive, I'll have examples that I can refer to later, but it's sort of imprinted in my mind when I do the testing. But so I do, you know, ring around tests, like see how much you know, fleshes are so important to me because I shoot fashion beauty. So I need to know where it starts to block up. So I'll see how the lens handles that film stock or that sensor. You know, like the SL2S it's a BSI, it's a backside illuminated sensor. That's different than the SL2.
Right.
Not the same even technology. And people always ask me, like I said, why do you use the SL2S? You know, and you know, so it's having firsthand knowledge. I do not go to YouTube and, you know, listen to somebody who's never even shot the damn thing.
Right.
Sorry,
Right.
you know, I do feel strongly about that. Sage was just mentioning here off screen that I shoot them, these tests in a very controlled circumstances. So they're tested in the same environment. It's not like shooting outdoor one day and indoor the next day. It's very controlled.
Right, yes, and I would also like to point out that your tests have to do with the characteristics of the lens as a whole, not what Mark was just describing has to do with testing the characteristics of a lens as a whole, not testing whether or not it works.
Yeah, they all work.
So, and it's important. I think I would like just to interject a note of technical aspect to on all of this, because we're talking about lenses at very wide apertures. We're talking about f2, 1.4, 1.2, and 1, and under 1. And it's important to understand for any of you who are thinking about doing this kind of work or who do your own work in very shallow depth of field, it's very important to understand that these are mechanical cameras, and a camera, the tolerance is a continuum. And if the camera is on this end and the lens is on this end, they might not play right together.
Right.
So, but what Mark is, and that's so I want to underscore that as distinct from the tests that Mark is talking about, which are about the fullness of the lens. How does it handle different lighting situations? How does it handle different focus distances? Because Leica lenses, by and large, as you get closer, the parallax becomes more difficult to resolve. And so all of these things that Mark is testing have to do with the general qualities of the lens, not whether or not it's back focusing or front focusing. And
yeah, that's just a technical thing that you have to be mindful
please
of.
no front or back focusing questions. We can do it. We can go one-on-one.
Let me interject here for a second.
Yes.
On note, my father, who I mentioned earlier, was a very fine photographer. He would go take me around when I'm a little kid here in New York City, where I speak to you from now. He would take me around to his favorite camera store and say, pick up a Hasselblad lens, like a Zeiss lens for Hasselblad. He would get 4 of them. The owner of the store they'd be friends. He'd get 4 of them, take them to the studio, and I know you know who this guy is when I say his name, but so you could take him to the studio and he would shoot them side by side. They're all brand new. And then he would get, so that's a practical test. Then he would take it to a guy named Marty Forscher. You remember Marty?
Sure.
Yeah, because that's certainly your dad's era, and like I said, and then you take the lenses to Marty. He was the great technician here in New York City. He's passed since, but and put them on the bench and do the bench test on those 4, and then he'd go return 3 of them, and he'd have 1. So that's the extent to knowing your equipment and doing testing.
Yeah. And I think it's really, really important to do that kind of thing, especially when you're working. It doesn't matter at 5.6. And I'm not saying that all of you f4, 5.6, or f8 or f11 photographers, they have lower standards, but the problems or the caveats in a very fast lens become manifest when it's shot wide open. So that's why a lot of our conversation, it has to do with shooting lenses wide open. Mark, tell me, how did you make this picture? This is spectacular.
Thank you. It's it was a little bit annoying, actually, I have to be frank. So I was in China on this occasion, and one of the people in my sort of entourage, my group, pushed something across the table. We were having a coffee, and pushed it across the table and said, "Here, try this." And I picked it up, and I could see that it's an extension tube of some sort, and it's the Leica macro adapter. And
Yes.
I had not seen this because it had not come out in the United States, but somehow this guy had it, and he said, "Shoot." So I put it on the camera and with the Noctilux, and took this picture, 1 frame, and that was it. And I said, "Thank you." And I handed him back the adapter. That was it. And then I just bothered everybody at Leica until I was able to buy one. But I do a lot of work with this combination. Again, I don't want everything in focus. That's not how we see. And
Right.
so this is a great, rather than shooting at f/16, which is fine. You know, I have a friend of mine, he's the best beauty photographer in the world. I don't mind saying his name, Ben Hassett, if you want to look up the best beauty photographer in the world. And he shoots a lot of it in focus. I don't. I love this because of that it has an intimacy to it. I think this, if I can digress for a second, this is a Leica, I'm going to read a quote if it's okay. This is a Leica publication on a group of lenses called Thalia that are made for cinema. In this, and I quote, images captured with the Leica Thalia lenses appear to have an added depth and dimensionality, especially on larger sensor cameras, because of their gradual focus fall off. Rather than having even flat planes of focus across the entire frame, the Thalia lenses have a gentle transition between in and out of focus objects that is consistent with the way we see things and yet is different from the images of most modern lenses.
This is why Leica.
Yep.
This is why we shoot Leica.
So they're aware of it. They're aware of how we see, and they design lenses that way. They're optimized to shoot wide open. It's not necessary they have apertures. I joke, I hope one day that I'm able to convince somebody at Leica to make a Noctilux, but with no aperture blades, just wide open. And that's it. It's a joke, but that'd be really fun, you know, for me. But
I think it'd be great. I mean, for people that shoot like you, people that shoot in this manner, I mean, look, a lot of the people that are using 0.95 lenses, they're using it at 0.95, in part because it's a big bulky lens, and that's what it does best. And there's nothing wrong with shooting a Noctilux lens at f8. I mean, these lenses are terrific at f8, but the reason to have a f1 or a 0.95 is to shoot it like this. So listen, before we run out of time, let's talk about 75s.
oh boy.
Because
Whole
got
Yeah.
a couple of more 50s.
Yeah, you can go through those. This is with the macro adapter on the left, the Prada thing, and on the right, I forget what that's from, but that's using the macro adapter and the Noctilux. This is the reissue when we first got that.
Which
So,
has all of the beautiful qualities of the original. Not only is it, let me just show, I'm going to show them off for a second here, because some of the people here may or may not know. So this is the original 51.2 Noctilux. And this is the reissue. There's almost no difference between them. They're both absolutely fabulous lenses. And this reissued lens, it has all of the characteristics of the original. And it makes photographs like this.
yep.
And so this is not a shill for the Leica Noctilux. You folks know where this stuff is and you know how to get it. It's about how each lens does differently and how they do things differently. But this reissue is every bit as good as the original, in my opinion. I think it's a fantastic lens.
Yeah, no, it really is. Yeah,
it has all of the qualities of the original. Let's talk about some 75s before the evening gets away from us.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of 75s that we want to talk about. One is 75 Summilux. And as Mark was saying earlier this evening, start with Mandler.
Yeah, Dr.
This is a Mandler design lens.
Yeah, this is the first image is the not the Mandler design, but the Peter Carbot design, the Noctilux 75.
Oh, this is a 75 Noctilux, yeah.
That particular one, yeah. just razor sharpness, and yet it has a delicacy about it. That's a hard lens to shoot. Like I had to work hard on this one, to get it, as I say, to wring its neck. I had to work at it, but I love it, and it's unique. There's no other lens there is that looks like this, and it has some, the subtle compression of a slightly longer lens, and but very much in the Noctilux, sort of family. Beautiful.
So do you ever have a moment where you think to yourself, gee, I've got a Noctilux on my camera, but I think I'd like to use the 75 Summilux instead? Like,
Yeah.
is there a focal length decision that you make, or is it a lens design and rendering decision that you make?
The latter. Yeah, no, it's very much about the characteristics of the lens.
Yeah.
I think Sage's favorite lens is the 75 Summilux. And also, I might add that it's was Dr. Mandler's favorite lens he ever designed was the 75
Right.
Summilux. And very much in the same family as the Noctilux, but it's got a slight, telephoto feel, Yeah, and very good for beauty, and it has a slightly shorter minimum focus, so I can get in closer because I don't do any cropping or anything. So
Right.
it's just on the edge of where I like to be, just enough. And look at this thing. You can see on the screen even. Look at the sharpness of the eyelashes and the lips. And this is it's a fantastic lens design without all the modern computer computations. I mean, they were using computers at that time. Mandler was, but this is, look at the rendering on that thing. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Did you take this picture with the macro adapter, or is this close focus on the Summilux?
I don't know. I'm going to ask Sage to answer that.
The 75 Summilux, which is a Mandler design, it's no longer manufactured, but it's terrific lens, f1.4. This lens focuses down to under a meter, which is kind of uncommon for Leica lenses. And in fact, it's about 2 feet, which is a very close focus for a Leica rangefinder lens, which is why I asked.
Yeah, this was at the long end of the macro, or the short end of the macro adapter, as far away as you can get with the 75 with the macro. Yeah.
It's a spectacular lens.
Yeah, the macro adapter, there's no glass in it. It's just a tube.
Yeah, it's just focusing helicoid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at this picture on the left. That's amazing.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, by the way. Again, I have a hard time with that. Yeah.
It's terrific stuff. Because of my Zoom interface, I can't see the tag below, but tell us about each of these pictures, please. What did you make? What did you use to make each of these images?
Well, the image on the left is very interesting because it's the Summilux 1.4, and you can see it's tremendous sharpness and yet beautiful fall off. And this was taken with the M8, and the M8 uniquely did not have an IR cut filter on the sensor. So what you're seeing is that the result of infrared light. This was a rainy day. She's standing under an umbrella, and there is infrared light that is coming through that umbrella, which sort of forms the background there, and giving you the infrared that sensor could see, but we can't see live. And so fantastic camera, and 10 megapixels. And you look at the freckles and see how that filter, the sensor uniquely, there's a Kodak made sensor, very unique rendering, one of the great cameras, digital cameras that Leica's made.
Now, are you using the M11 these days? Have you had a chance to experiment between the 18, the 24, and the 36 megapixel level of the M11?
No, I have not done that. I'm aware of it. I've shot it, but I don't feel I can speak authoritatively on that. Like I like to speak with full knowledge about it, having fully tested, and I have not. I love the BSI sensor, which is the technology in the SL2S and the M11. The M11 is the
Right.
first rangefinder camera made by Leica with the backside illuminated sensor, which is just, it's game changing. I shot it actually with my buddy Sean out west on the day that it came out. It didn't get as much time with it as I wanted because I had to travel, but yeah, and I've shot it since. Fantastic camera. I mean, it, you know, again, for me, I like the 24 megapixels with the space between the pixels and the size of the pixels. So while you can change the number of the sensor settings, it still starts with a tremendous amount of capability that is different than a 24 megapixel that starts that way and ends that way. So again, just for me, the magic is 24 megapixels.
I think so too. I do think that 24 is magic. And for those of you who don't know, already, Sean is the fellow who runs Camera West and the San Francisco Leica store. So for any of you who are out in the West Coast who might be Leica aficionados or Leica curious, please do go visit the San Francisco Leica store or any of the Camera West locations. They're fabulous people and have a tremendous knowledge base and are a lot of fun to hang out with. So any of you on the West Coast, that's okay that you're out that way, and please go look up Sean because they're good. They're good people for sure.
One big happy family.
It's one big happy family.
All the Leica folks, yeah.
That's right. That's right. I mean, speaking of one big happy family, look at this picture on the left. This is fabulous. This is one of the most joyous pictures I think I've ever seen. So tell me again, I'm going to guess that the one on the left is a 74 Summilux.
That's the Summilux, yeah. And funny story about that one, I'll try to make it brief, but I had shot the day before for the Condé Nast Italia, the Vogue Italia Vanity Fair group, a very dramatic black and white couture garments in this park behind a museum, and it was just very dramatic and very Italian, if you will. And the same art director who hired me for that one, the next day shooting for Italian Glamour. And so on the day I'm shooting the really dramatic stuff, more the Vogue Italia type stuff, she's saying to me, now, Mark, you have to understand, tomorrow it's glamour, it's fun, it's color, and so you understand. I'm like, yeah, I got it. Like, no, but it's glamour, it's not like this, it's, I was like, her name is Alessia. I'm like, Alessia, we're good, we're fine, So this was one of the images for the next day, because she was very nervous because I'm sort of known for being a bit dramatic, in my work. And I was like, no, I got you, no problem, we got it. So it was a very successful day and very fun, like you said. Like, it's just got a spirit, and again, this is the combination of camera and lens and setting and color and all these things make the image. It's not just any one thing. The knee bone's connected to the thigh bone. You got to figure it out, put it together. Piece it all together.
That's right. And in many ways, the 75 and the 50 are very different lenses. It's not just about taking 2 steps closer. So let's look at a couple of more photographs. Again, we've got the same kind of thing. We've got 75 Summilux and 75 Noctilux. And you can see that both lenses have a really terrific and beautiful fall off. I mean, I think that we'd have to dive deeply into the raw images to really see the difference between these two lenses, other than the flatness of the field with the aspherical lens on the right.
Yeah, it's the 75 inherently has more compression than the 50s, obviously. So there's that feeling that like you said, you can't just walk in and have the same, with the 50 and have the same rendering. It's not possible. The one on the left, the Summilux, that was for a cosmetic company, a huge cosmetic company in Japan, the second largest after Shiseido. And it has a romantic feel to it. It's a romantic type, cosmetic company. And so I chose to shoot the Summilux rather than the Noctilux for that, because it gives me a bit more romance. So it's like, you know, you can determine what your destination is and then choose, you know, what car you want to drive. And of course, on the right, you know, again, it's a very challenging, I don't mean it in a negative way, but a very challenging lens to shoot. So you got to really be on your game and experiment and just shoot and shoot and shoot. Like driving a fast car, a race car, they call it seat time. You got to have a lot of seat time, a lot of laps. That lens is very much that way. Not unlike a lot of precision made elements, whatever, if it's a tool, a car, a lens, you know, like I love it. And I love the challenge too, but that's an example of getting caught in the sort of the waves of her hair by what you render in focus and out of focus becomes very dynamic, and you feel you're in it rather than just away from it.
It's kind of like the picture we saw a few frames back with the gal, also on the right side of our screen, who was not really engaged with the photograph, and it just didn't seem like it seemed like a candid. And this has that same feel, because many fashion or beauty photographs, it's all about the eyes or the lips and this is just about this moment and this hair. It's fabulous.
Well,
And
that's
it's
for,
amazing what the 75 can do.
yeah, yeah, it is
So
amazing. It's
let's divert for a moment away from
yeah,
M lenses
yeah.
and talk about the Summicron S, and we see that on the left, and the Thambar, which is a reissue lens, on the right.
Yeah. The Summicron S, it's 100 millimeters. That's basically what people call the Noctilux for medium format. It really is very similar rendering. Incredible lens, like a modern Noctilux, and coupled with the S, that was what the 007S medium format camera Leica made. They now make the S3. The 007 at that time for me was the best sensor made for photography, period, under any description. The S007, it had 15.3 stops of dynamic range, and you can see that in this image where it's just handling all the range of exposure, and just the most beautiful lens, you know, for that format. And you can see it in this image. Very, very difficult image to have correct. It's a beauty thing, and you know, the flesh has to be correct, and the lip color and the dress. This is a very specific type shoot, and handled it beautifully. So they took the technology that they had accumulated and went into the medium format stuff with the S cameras, and it took the, you know, technology over there. And the Summicron, of course, it's an f2 and 100 millimeter, and just crazy.
Wow.
And then
And you know, it's interesting that it's coupled here with the Thambar, which is in a sense kind of the opposite end of the Leica spectrum. I mean, so here we have an image that, again, it's unlike your common glamour or beauty photographs, because we're not, I mean, we are eventually drawn to the face, but we have a lot of this kind of negative area with the brambles and whatnot, and the overexposed. You know, the eye always goes to the brightest part of the frame. So it's interesting to me to see the darkness on the left side and the brightness on the right side, and still wind up looking at her face.
yeah. Yeah, it's a amazing lens, really amazing. It's funny because I never hear anybody talk about what that lens does at different apertures.
Yeah.
It's asked by Leica to you know, test and introduce this lens to the marketplace. I shot it for 6 months straight. Every job I did, every test I did, I also brought the 90 and shot additionally with the 90. It was just a great fun time, netting a lot of results. It's funny because Kieran, who's head of marketing for the United States, had called me and asked me, do will you test a lens for me? And I was like, of course. And and she said, it's 90 millimeter, and it's aperture 2.2. And I said, oh, the fan bar. And she said, how did you know that? I said, well, they used to make that lens, we're making it again. And she goes, how did you know that? I said, what do you mean? It's a lens. I've shot it. It's a great, very cool lens. But that it's a sort of funny story that way. But the lens, it's, if you, and you could do this, and I happen to know where let's say I think I know that you have a fan bar in that shop where you sit right now. The fan bar, if you stop down to f4, which is not far off from wide open, which I tested everything in the course of testing the lens, that thing is tack sharp.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Or,
It only does its fan bar specialty if you're using either the spot filter or if you're at 2.2.
yeah, it gets like a normal 90, super sharp, beautiful rendering. Like, and it's funny, it was designed in like 33 or 34, that 1933, 34, by the way. And then reintroduced whenever it was, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago.
And it's not a gigantic lens. I mean, it's a relatively reasonable sized lens. Do you, let me break away from this for just a second to talk about what do you scan? Do you like, what do you do with film? Like, how do you scan your film?
Yeah, well, we scan it as well as we can. There are people who, that's another, art and science. So we
Yeah.
work with, for rough stuff, we just do it here at the studio. If you have a slow evening, a lot of patience, we'll scan a bunch of stuff, because I shoot a lot of film all the time, from 35 millimeter up to 8x10. So yeah, so you have to scan. We're actually right now scanning the stuff for the L'Officiel shoot for them to publish. And so we just get good high-res scans and that are faithful to the original shoot. And yeah, so and often I'll make prints, dark, wet prints, and then just scan those, because then there's not as much sort of interpretation of the image, because it's in print. You know what I mean? See it. So it's actually easier, I think, to do great scans when you have an example of what you want the image to look like.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's better to have the printed image right there. I mean,
all the stuff down on the art side for me, I print myself. The first, what they call artist proof, the AP prints.
Yes.
I print all myself. So I'll print like, I'll end up with 3 APs for every image. This is for, exhibition or.
That's pretty standard to have 2 to 3 APs per an edition. Yeah.
And so when we go to the printer, like, printing a book, for instance, we have tangible things, in your hand to look at. Again, everyone's different, everybody sees differently. Like you say, oh, red, like it's not the same red to everybody.
Right,
but,
right. Well, especially if you have that sensibility about for being a film director and also just having the, these kinds of things, photographic things in mind about the different colors, like you say about the image on the left and the all of the different gradations. I mean, you've got to look at all of that.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. So do you shoot film just for fun, or are you shooting film for work as well?
No, like I said, like the L'Officiel editorial, that's work. I shoot film for work all the time. I mean, a lot of my clients, they want to, have it literally that night. And so obviously I can't shoot. I mean, I could, but it doesn't make sense. And so I'll shoot, digital, obviously, so we can just get it out as their deliverables dictate, So I love film. I carry a film camera with me every day. By the way, I switch between an MP, current MP film camera and an M4 and an M3 and an M2. So depending on my mood, a bag with two cameras, this one here, the monochrome with a 35, and then the film camera of my choice for the day.
Well, this is awesome. I'm thrilled. I love it that you're shooting film. It's great.
Yeah.
I kind of expected you to say, oh, maybe once in a while, but this is wonderful.
Oh,
Mark,
no.
I advanced to this slide a little too quickly, but we're starting to run out of time. So I just want to talk for a few minutes about some of the things that bring you to where you are in your Leica journey and in your career and in your art.
Yeah.
And we have a couple of titles here that I'd love to hear what you think about.
Yeah. Well, this is, sort of my, private sort of pursuit. I love the knowledge of how things work, and I just have a tremendous amount of curiosity, and so I do a lot of studying in this, sector, the neurobiology of sight and the cognitive psychology of sight, and the combination of those two things, the elixir that is, my thoughts about how we see, and then therefore incorporating that into my work. And I hope to teach as many people as I can about this, because it's fascinating. But Vision and Art is this book that's sort of a standard. It's such a sort of narrow field, I guess. But Margaret Livingston is one of the heads of the Harvard Medical School. She's a medical doctor in the neurobiology segment, and she's written these books that are quite informative in its vision, but it also relates to art, which is, sort of perfect for me. I found it in a bookstore, I think in LA, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, this particular book, and I recommend it to anybody who has these interests in about the way we see, because there's a lot of biology in it that might be helpful in terms of understanding how to mess with this world we call photography or images.
And some of the nuances involved there, yeah. And this Livingstone, she's no slouch. This is not just somebody who slapped together a book. I mean, this is
Oh
something
no,
worth reading.
no, no.
This is something worth reading for sure. And we have another title here. I love this book.
Yeah, this one, again, it's funny because Eric Kandel, he's just like amazing, and this relates to he teaches at Columbia University. Is also, I think, of course, the winner of the Nobel Prize, sort of significant. So he is also related to art, which I think is so wonderful, that we've got these amazing scientists so accomplished, and then relating it to art. So it makes it sort of more tangible for a lot of people if they're not going to medical school, let's say. So highly recommended. It's funny because my sister is a board certified neurologist, medical doctor. She graduated first in her class at Columbia in medical school with 8 honors and this stuff. And you never even know she was a doctor if you meet her. She's so unassuming, but quite knowledgeable. And I was so excited when I got this book, and I was like, her name is Alessia. I said, Alessia, this is like great guy, this Eric Kandel, like, I'm reading this book and blah, blah, blah. And she goes, yeah, no, I was in his class at Columbia. Like, the guy's amazing. Like, it was very funny. But so this is great and not difficult to understand. I highly, highly recommended. And that's a Rothko painting on the front there. And Rothko just like takes my breath away, and I don't know how that happens, but like I could come across a Rothko in a museum, and I just like, I can't breathe. I don't know.
I know. It is kind of arresting in its simplicity. I
Yeah.
think both of these titles are very approachable. Now, the first one, the Livingstone book, I haven't read. This one I have, and they're both very approachable. So for any of you that have interest in the microbiology or in the neuroscience or in how the brain actually does what the brain does, these are terrific titles, and I would urge you to look into them. I want to talk for a moment about what's coming up, because I mean, Mark is not just he's not just a guy that shoots with all these fancy schmancy lenses. all these beautiful women and all this wonderful stuff, but he actually makes art. So if you're interested, he's got stuff. He's got stuff that's going to be great on your table in your office. Things that you'll want to look through, and titles that you will find inspiration in. We want to let you know that this stuff is out there for those of you who are not already familiar with Mark DePaola. So, and again, we're gonna connect all of this. So, any of you who have any questions about any of this stuff, will be able to reach out to Mark and talk with him about, in particular, 5 years and 60 seconds. It's just terrific, terrific book. And so, we want to also talk a little bit about how you can get directly involved with Mark or with me or in the Leica Academy, or however you want to be involved.
Or both. Maybe we'll plan both of us to do
Oh
it.
my goodness, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I would love to do it, but we're all one big happy family. So
Right.
whether you're in Des Moines or Chicago or LA or New York or wherever you're at, there's something relatively nearby, even if it's Zoom. There's something relatively nearby where you can be involved. So if you're going to be in LA or DC or New York, what I like to call the second city, or Porto,
Yeah. The second
I
factory.
can't wait to take one of your master classes. I'm looking forward to it. So as soon as you get to Chicago, or I can get away, I'll see you there.
All right.
So keep an eye on Mark DePaula's contact information. He's at DePaula Pictures on Instagram. He's all over the place, so you'll be able to find him. Keep an eye out. If any of these dates work for you, sign up now.
Yeah.
Here in Chicago, we've got kind of a fun thing happening towards the end of April with Chef Jim Sullivan. We're going to do a Leica Academy here in Chicago, and so I would urge you, if you have any interest in food photography or in cocktails, to come and have fun with us here in Chicago on April 29th and 30th.
Sounds great.
So as I say thank you and good evening, I will leave our contact information up for you to jot down. Again, I'll be sending out an email tomorrow with all the contact information, and there will be a recording of this video so you can return to it and watch as you wish. Mark, I'm just thrilled to have this conversation with you, man, and cover all of these vintage and new lenses, and to see what you're doing and how you're doing it. I'm just thrilled you were able to spend the time with us.
It's my pleasure. We covered a lot of ground. I could use
We did.
I
could be a part two.
I could use one of those cocktails about now.
Me too. We're going to do a part two. So all you folks, stay tuned, because we haven't figured it out. It's probably news to Mark, but we'll do a part two. We got more to talk about.
Yeah.
We only barely got through 35 and 50, right?
Yeah, no, we got a lot. We got a lot. It goes deep. It's fun.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to continue the conversation. And I feel like I'm cutting us short now, but Zoom is about to kick us off. Oh. So I cannot thank you all enough for being a part of this Leica conversation.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time. It's important to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for making the time. We're absolutely thrilled to have you. Can't wait to talk to you again. We're going to be following your work, and maybe even following you around in LA and DC and in Porto as well. So you might find some of us on your coattails trying to learn a little bit about Leica lenses and photography. So Mark, thank you once again. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and insight with us.
Thanks for the opportunity. See you
anytime, soon. Baby. We can't wait to have you back. We'll see you all again very soon. Yep. So thank you so much for being a part. Gary, good to see you. Good to see all of you. Thank you so much for being a part. Have a lovely evening. Can't wait till next time.
Right. Later.
Get out there and make some pictures.